The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 15th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Meanwhile, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around Jesus to listen to his teaching, at which the Pharisees and the religious scholars murmured, "This person welcomes sinners and eats with them." Jesus then addressed this parable to them. A man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to their father, "Give me the share of the estate that is coming to me." So the father divided up the property between them. Some days later, the younger son gathered up his belongings and went off to a distant land. He there squandered all his money on loose living. After everything was spent, a great famine broke out in the land, and the son was in great need. So he went to a landowner who sent him to a farm to take care of the pigs. The son was so hungry that he could have eaten the husks that were fodder for the pigs, but no one made a move to give him anything. Coming to his senses at last, he said, "How many hired hands at my father's house have more than enough to eat, while here I am starving? I'll quit and go back home and say, 'I've sinned against God and against you. I no longer deserve to be called one of your children. Treat me like one of your hired hands.'" With that, the younger son set off for home. While still a long way off, the father caught sight of the returning son and was deeply moved. The father ran out to meet him, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, "I have sinned against God and against you. I no longer deserve to be called one of your children." But his father said to one of the workers, "Quick, bring out one of the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. Take the calf we've been fattening and butcher it. Let's eat and celebrate. This son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, and now he's found." And the celebration began. Meanwhile, the elder son had been out in the field. As he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the workers and asked what was happening. The worker answered, "Your brother is home, and the fatted calf has been killed because your father has him back safe and sound." The son got angry at this and refused to go into the party. But his father came out and pleaded with him. The older son replied, "Look, for years now I've done every single thing you asked me to do. I never disobeyed even one of your orders, yet you never gave me so much as a kid goat to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came home, after going through your money with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." "But my child," the father said, "you're with me always, and everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and rejoice. This brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, and now he's found." The Gospel of the Lord. So first of all, I need to note that the fact that I am preaching for the first time in 7 weeks after coming back from sabbatical is entirely coincidental that we're talking about the story of the prodigal son returning. This is not the way it was set up. Sometimes people think that pastors select readings like this, but this is just the way the lectionary put things. But I have been on sabbatical for 7 weeks, and during that time, if you watch my Facebook posts, all you saw were pictures of me skiing, because I did a lot of that as well. But I spent a lot of time doing reading and theological reflection. But the very first theological reflection that I did on sabbatical was entirely unplanned. It was done while I was driving across I-70 through Missouri and Kansas. Some of you may have driven on that road on I-70 through Missouri and Kansas, and if you have, I'm sorry. It is long. It is boring. You swear that miles in Missouri and Kansas are longer than miles anyplace else, and you think you're never going to get anywhere. So to keep you from being too bored, there are apparently groups of people who have put up religious billboards every couple of miles to entertain you. And they're the only things out there, so you read them because you can't help it. So I'm going along this road, and I'm reading these billboards. And as I'm reading these billboards, I'm thinking, you know, it's not that they're technically wrong, but I'm becoming more and more worried about the image of God that I'm getting as I read these billboards and I think about them. So they say things like, "Jesus is real." Okay, I think Jesus is real too. But to me, that's always like, that's good, right? But this sort of had the connotation of like, the boogeyman is real. He's under your bed and he's coming to get you. It's like, that's a little weird. And then I go along and I see more signs that say things like, "After you die, you will meet God. Like, that to me is promise. That's good. After I die, I'm going to meet God face to face. And except that the connotation here, the image of God is like, after you die, you will meet God. Sort of threat rather than promise. And I'm like, I'm a little uncomfortable with this. And maybe that's because then the next billboard you see, it's something like, if you die tonight, heaven or hell? I'm like, all right. You know, those are biblically the two options, you know, one or the other, but it's kind of like God is the mafia boss. Hey, nice little life you got here. It'd be too bad if somebody were to throw you into the fires of hell for all eternity, you know? And like, I know me, and I know a lot of you, and we all got plenty of problems. We don't need God making more problems for us. And this seems to be the image and the character of God that's being conveyed through these billboards. And I thought to myself, you know, if I didn't know anything about this Jesus guy, if all I knew was what I saw on the billboards, I don't think I would want anything to do with Jesus. Now, of course, the folks who put up those signs and others like them might say that I am totally misreading the implications. But, you know, as I wrote along and I thought about those signs, I got more and more worried about what people would think about who God was if all they knew about God was to look at the implications from these billboards. So, if God really is the mafia boss, is that really the right image of God? Is that who God is? Is that who Jesus is? I remember one of my New Testament professors in seminary talked to us about how you could actually create a vision of Jesus to be pretty much anything you wanted if you edited him properly. If you only looked at certain things that he said and did, you could make him into the mild-mannered, you know, really nice person, or you could make him kind of mean. And he had literally written books analyzing all the ways people had thought about Jesus. He had a book that we had us read we were supposed to read. Anyway, it was that thick, and that much of it was footnote, because he had looked at all the ways that you could look at God. But in the middle of that whole discussion, he said to us, you know what? Every single one of you has an image of who Jesus is, whether you're conscious of it or not. And you cannot function without it. You have formed this image of who God is. So what is it? What's your image of Jesus? Who is God to you? Because the image of who God is conditions who you think you are and what your relationship with that kind of God is going to be. So is God a mafia boss who is watching you closely to find out the moment when he needs to smite you, which is sort of what the billboards kind of implied to me? Is God just a distant reality who really doesn't have anything to do with what's going on right now, but, you know, someday after you die, you'll get to see Grandma again? I know people who think that also. Is God somebody who walks with you, who strengthens you through the troubles you've got in your life and who actually helps you? What's your image of God? I raise these questions because, not only because they're important for each of us, but because the real reason that Jesus tells parables is to give us an impression of who God really is. The parables are intended to imply characteristics of God even more surely than those billboards would. And even though we tend to call today's parable the parable of the prodigal son, it's really not about the son. It's about the Father. And in looking at the Father, Jesus intends to inform our image of the being and the character of God. So what does Jesus want us to learn about God? What is he implying about God through this parable? Now, the great thing about parables is that there are endless things that you can do. So you can preach on this for 30 years and still come up with different things, but there are three, I think, really important things that Jesus is implying about God in this parable for our relationship with God that I think are really important. The first is that God is an absolute realist. The father in this parable doesn't welcome the son home because he is too naive to believe what the son has been up to. The older son comes up to the father at the end and says, you know what, this son of yours, and notice this son of yours, not this brother of mine, this son of yours has been out squandering your money with prostitutes, and at the end of that, the father does not say what so often we say today, no, fake news, not really, no, it can't possibly be true. The father knows what the son's been up to. He isn't welcoming the son home and loving the son because he doesn't believe that the son has been up to that. Nor does he harbor any delusion that the son is going to be a totally changed and different person now that the son has come home. And we don't know anything about what the son does once he comes home, except that what does the son do once he comes home? The father throws a party, and the scene closes with party boy partying at the father's party. What got him in trouble? He left home, and he was party boy. He's the same guy he was before. That's not why the father welcomes him home. The father welcomes him home simply because he loves him and he wants him home. We used to do work camp, so one of our first songs today was from work camp. We took teenagers, high school kids, junior high kids, and we went and we would fix people's houses and help out folks for a week. And in the evening they would do devotions with us, and there was always a theme for each week of each year that we did work camp. And the one year that I was a red shirt, so I was one of the people helping coach this stuff, the story of the prodigal son was our theme for the entire week. And I was very cognizant that group, which runs wonderful work camps, is sometimes a little light in theology. So I was wondering how they were going to deal with this. And they had a video one night of the setup, the father and the mother of the prodigal son. They're sitting there kind of like the old painting of Ma and Pa on the farm. They're sitting there in their rocking chairs, and the father's going, "My son, he's gone. I'm worried about my son. I hope my son's okay." And as he's doing this, Mom's sitting there, and Mom says, now, in his heart, he's really a good boy. And the dad says, "No, he's not. He's rude, he's arrogant, he's self-centered. But he's my son, and I love him, and I want him home." And I thought, they got the theology right. Because that's the image Jesus lifts up. He's my son, I love him, I want him home. That's the way God feels about all of us. That's what Jesus wants to imply about God in this parable. Another thing that Jesus wants to imply about God in this parable is that God wants to have a real relationship with each one of us. And that relationship cannot be forced or coerced through threats. That's why the father waits patiently for the son to return. He clearly knows, or apparently knows, where the son is and what the son is up to. He does not send threatening letters to the son, "Better stop that or else." He doesn't send messengers to threaten. He does not lecture him when he comes home and tell him, "See, I told you this would happen." He wants the son to come home, and that he wants to have a real relationship with the son, and that can only happen when the son is ready for that. And that's what God's patience is really about. The New Testament talks about patience a lot of time, and why is God patient? And Jesus sets up this story in which the patience of God is not to sort of enable bad behavior, nor is it to bide time until the son comes home so he can smite him. It's so that God can actually have a real, actual, loving relationship with each one of us, which has to be something that each one of us is ready for. And that's what God's patience is really about. It can never be done with threats, which is probably what was bothering me about the billboards. Because I thought, if you want to actually entice people into a relationship with God, I've never, ever known that works by threatening people. You can threaten people and get them to, do certain behaviors. I mean, it works in my life. We have this really stupid red arrow that they put up in an intersection near my house. It used to not be there. And so I sit there, and I think, there's nobody coming. Anyway, well, sitting there, I could go through this. I don't, because I know that the second I would do that, a cop would come out of someplace and give me a ticket. It's a threat. It modifies my behavior, but it never gives me a relationship. That's what God wants, is not to modify our behavior as much as to have a real living relationship with us. That's what Jesus is implying with that. But perhaps the most sort of difficult and obnoxious thing that that Jesus is doing by implying in this parable is that God also includes the melodramatic, obnoxious older son. You know, you would think that this parable should end after the younger son comes home. He was lost, he was found, he was dead, but now he's alive, and the party started. End of story, except that it keeps going, where the older son stands outside and refuses to come in to the party. So the father goes out and he starts to plead with the older son. You notice he doesn't order the older son and say, you must go in, get in there. Because again, he wants the relationship also with the older son. The older son, though, probably doesn't want to go in because he decides that, you know what? His younger brother and his buddies who are in the party, I don't want to party with them. They're scum. I don't want to party with them. And for that matter, the younger son and his buddies are probably going, I don't want to party with those arrogant, obnoxious people. I don't want to party with them. But the Father wants them all in there. He wants the people who think of themselves as us and the people who think of themselves as them, or are thought of as them. And so in our very polarized society right now, where we tend to divide people up between us and them, one of the things that Jesus is doing in this parable is to say, whoever you think of yourself as, and whoever you think of us, whatever group you consider us, God loves you. God wants to include you. But God also wants to include all the people that you think of as them. All the people that you think are too obnoxious to be at the party, even the people who put up those obnoxious and, in my humble opinion, theologically heretical billboards. God even wants them. God wants everybody. That's one of the most important things that Jesus is implying about God in this parable. You know, often we're tempted to read these parables and to think that they're primarily about us. That is, who should we be? How should we behave? What should we do? And certainly there are lessons to be learned in those ways as well from the parables. But in the end, the parables are not ever primarily about us. They are always about God and who God intends to be in our lives. So as you read this parable and others, think about the images of who God is. Let those images form your relationship and the relationship that you have with God. And maybe most importantly, make sure that your image of God is formed by the things that Jesus tells you and not the billboards that you see online.